Yeah, Diane.
You've been gone so long!
Yeah, forgot I wanted to be haunted.
When you lose someone, at some point you have to let them go. Rick never did. He just held on and held on and held on, and the longer he held on, the more his beloved Diane stopped being a person and started becoming something perfect. Something that nothing real could ever compete with. 20 years of his life spent with a ghost living rent-free in his head, slowly poisoning everything around him. Fairy food in his mind. Before the endless burping, before the infinite flasks of liquor, and before the crippling toxic nihilism that defined a decade of television, Rick Sanchez was just a guy. He was a husband, a father. When we finally see his unedited, untampered story in the season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, we're introduced to a version of Rick that's completely alien to the monster we know today. He turns down the power of a god. He rejects the central premise of the entire show just so he can stay home with his wife, Diane, and their little girl, Beth. He's achieved the perfect idealized state of wedded bliss. He's completely content. But the multiverse of Rick and Morty actively punishes happiness. Rick Prime is the ultimate toxic mirror. He represents everything our Rick could be if he threw away his humanity, and he looks at our Rick's love for Diane as an insult to his own ego. To Rick Prime, a Rick who chooses love over science and godhood is a threat to the very idea of what a Rick is supposed to be. So as our Rick decides to abandon science, pack up his prototype, and go for a drive with his family, a portal tears open in the garage. A bomb drops out. In a fraction of a second, the idealized bliss he's built is reduced to blood and ashes on the driveway. But this is Rick and Morty, a show where death is usually completely meaningless. If Rick loses a family member, he doesn't have to grieve, right? He can just build his portal gun, step into an alternate dimension where he died instead, and replace him, and just go on as if everything were normal. We literally watch him and Morty do exactly this way later in his life in Rick Potion number 9, casually burying their own alternate dimensional corpses in the backyard and slipping into their dead counterparts' lives. If Diane just died in Dimension C-137, Rick could have grieved for a week, then found a universe where he died but she lived, and walked right back into her arms before dinner. But he can't, because Rick Prime didn't just murder his Diane, he murdered all of them. He completely, cosmically erased her. As the overarching plot unfolds, culminating in the 5th episode of Season 7, Unmortricken, we learn the horrifying truth about the weapon Rick Prime used. While trapping our Rick and dozens of other alternate Ricks in a deadly maze, Rick Prime reveals exactly why none of them could ever find their wives.
If you're seeing this, you're me. Except, less. But you acted like you were better, so I killed your beloved Diane.
The Omega device deletes a person from existence across every single timeline. It wipes them out of the cosmic source code. This is the exact inciting incident that creates the Rick Sanchez we know. The bomb in the garage, along with many others we assume, completely shattered his capacity for hope. When the Omega device wiped out Diane, it left Rick with exactly one thing to hold on to, a memory of her. And Rick Sanchez did what the smartest man in the universe does with anything he can't solve. He held on to it for 20 years. A memory is a psychological trap. A memory can't love you back. A memory can't comfort you in the dark when you wake up screaming. It can't do anything new. And worst of all, a perfect memory can never be proven wrong.
You wanna jump the shark? You wanna know my stupid crybaby backstory? Knock yourself out.
When a normal human being expresses catastrophic loss, there's a universally understood protocol for grief. You're supposed to go through some psychological stages like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. Rick Sanchez completely bypassed acceptance. He bypassed depression. Instead, he took up permanent, decades-long residence in anger, and he weaponized his heartbreak. Here's what 20 years of unprocessed grief actually looks like. Rick didn't perfectly portal travel to explore the wonders of the cosmos. He didn't invent his iconic portal gun to learn about new alien cultures, to solve the mysteries of the universe, or to elevate the human race. He built it for one purpose, a violent one, to hunt down the one who took his wife. And in that blind, obsessive quest to avenge his idealized past, Rick committed absolute horrors. When Morty finally downloads Rick's unedited memories in the Season 5 finale, we see a broken man who has completely lost his mind, transforming into a sci-fi John Wick. He becomes such an unstoppable, terrifying force of nature that the other infinite Ricks realize they can't defeat him. They literally have to surrender to him. They bow down in the ashes of their own bases, agreeing to build the Citadel of Ricks just to appease him and stop the genocide of their own kind. Rick fundamentally believes that if he can just inflict enough suffering on the universe, it'll somehow balance out the agonizing suffering inside his own soul. While Rick was busy building tracking devices, executing his alternate selves, and drinking himself into a stupor in dirty, neon-lit space bars, his actual life was passing him by. Decades into his hunt, he eventually crashes his ship into a dimension where Diane was erased, but Beth was still alive. He could have stopped there, he could have put the portal gun down, walked into the house, and just have been a good father to the daughter he abandoned. He could have been there to watch Morty and Summer grow up from day one. Instead, he subjected himself to decades of self-inflicted torture. He lived out of his spaceship like a vagrant. He pushed away anyone who genuinely tried to care about him, turning his best friend Bird Person's sincere offers of connection into a joke. He marinated his brain in alcohol just to drown out the deafening noise of his own thoughts. He did all of this because he convinced himself that finding Rick Prime was the only thing that mattered. He turned revenge into his religion. He believed that if he could just kill the man who dropped the bomb, the memory of Diane would finally let him sleep. But revenge is a mirage, a fantasy. And in Season 7, Episode 5, on Mortrekken, Rick finally reaches the oasis of revenge in the desert of his search, only to find it completely suffocatingly dry. After 20 years of searching, Rick, with the help of Morty Prime, or Evil Morty, finally corners Rick Prime. He strips away Prime's godlike defenses, traps him in a room, and prepares to deliver the killing blow. But Rick Prime doesn't beg for mercy. He doesn't make this satisfying.
What's your life without me?
Let's find out.
Admit it, you would have been me.
Rick Prime understands his pursuer's twisted psychology better than anyone. He knows at this point that he's the only thing giving Rick C-137 a reason to live. When the life finally leaves Rick Prime's eyes, and our Rick walks out of that room covered head to toe in his enemy's blood, what's the grand prize here? What does the smartest man in the universe feel after solving the only equation that ever mattered to him? Absolutely nothing. The revenge is utterly hollow. Beating Rick Prime to death didn't bring Diane back. It didn't rebuild the garage. It didn't undo 20 years of alcoholism, self-hatred, and profound isolation. All it did was leave Rick staring at the same ghost he'd been chasing for his entire adult life. He didn't feel any different. It was just routine at this point. With no villain left to chase, Rick is finally forced to face the collateral damage sitting right in his own living room. He can finally get to his own wrecked life. Because when you spend 20 years trying to avenge a ghost, you become entirely blind to the living.
No, weddings are basically funerals with cake. If I wanted to watch someone throw their life away, I'd hang out with Jerry all day.
This is the point where Rick's tragic backstory stops being a sympathetic excuse for his behavior. His absolute inability to let go of Diane's memory is part of the exact reason he treats his current family with such casual shock and cruelty. To understand how deep this trauma goes, you have to look at how Rick views the concepts of marriage, romance, and vulnerability in the present day. When Rick delivers that famous "funerals with cake" line, we as the audience usually just laugh. I mean, everything is a joke in this show. But when you rewatch this scene with the full context of Diane's murder, the humor completely drains out of the moment. A lot of the time, he's not joking. To Rick Sanchez, a wedding is a literal funeral. His marriage ended with a bomb dropping through the ceiling. A marriage is just a guarantee that you'll witness your loved one's death. And that horrifying subconscious association makes him completely terrified of the one person in the multiverse he should love the most, his daughter, Beth. Beth is the living, breathing embodiment of the woman Rick lost. Every single time he looks across the kitchen table at her, he sees Diane's face, he hears Diane's voice. But instead of cherishing her and keeping her close, instead of protecting her at all times, Rick constantly gaslights her, he abandons her. Why? Because truly loving Beth and being vulnerable would require Rick to be emotionally present in the real world, would require him to see Beth as Beth and not part of Diane. If he actually sits down, hugs his daughter, apologizes for leaving her, and accepts his role as a loving grandfather to Morty and Summer, he's admitting that it's time to move on. He's acknowledging that the past is the past. That is something very difficult for him to move through. So he finds psychological loopholes to avoid emotional attachment. And the biggest, most incredibly messed up loopholes of all occur in Season 3. In the episode The ABCs of Beth, Beth finally confronts the darkness within her own mind. She realizes that she's kind of exactly like her father, brilliant, arrogant, and dangerously sociopathic at times. Overwhelmed by the realization that she might not actually want the domestic life she's built with Jerry and the kids, she turns to the one person who understands her. It's kind of a stunning abdication of his role as a father. Just go ahead, do what you want, and here's the power to do so. But the tragedy doesn't stop there. As we learn in Season 4, Rick doesn't just clone her. He literally builds a machine to shuffle the two bodies around like a cosmic shell game, and he actively wipes his own memory of which one is the original Beth and which one is the Space Beth clone. Well, maybe it doesn't matter, but he did intentionally blind himself to the truth. He actively chooses not to know if the daughter sitting in his own living room is his original daughter or a clone. Because if you don't know what's real to you in the first place, you don't have to fully commit to caring about it. Every time he claims that family is just a biological trap for idiots, he's building a psychological shield. He drags his grandson into chaotic, life-threatening adventures weekly because dodging laser blasts, fighting aliens, and collapsing intergalactic governments is significantly easier than sitting in a quiet room for therapy or processing his own feelings at the dinner table with family. Rick is physically alive, and he's thriving in terms of power and seeming connection, but he holds the destructive power of a literal god. What is he supposed to do with that? Physically, he's peak, but emotionally, part of Rick died in that garage right alongside Diane, and he still hasn't fully processed it. He's convinced himself that he's protecting his family by keeping them at a distance, but in reality, he's just using them as props to avoid his own grief. To understand why his pain is so radioactive, we have to look past the sci-fi gadgets and examine a very real, terrifying human phenomenon.
Rick, is that you?
Yeah, Diane.
It's a terrifying, heartbreaking window into Rick Sanchez's broken mind.
Yeah, forgot I wanted to be haunted.
I guess you predicted you might. That's where haunting comes in handy, huh?
To truly grasp why Rick's grief is so unshakable and why his intellect can't save him, we have to step away from the sci-fi tropes for a moment and examine a very real, dangerous human psychological phenomenon. We need to talk about the fading effect bias. The human brain is a remarkable, highly efficient machine wired for the sole purpose of survival. One of the ways it protects our sanity after severe emotional trauma is by slowly deleting the emotional weight of negative memories, while simultaneously holding onto and enhancing the positive ones. When a long-term relationship ends, or when a loved one suddenly passes away, your brain naturally begins to edit the footage of your life together. For a normal, healthy human being, the fading effect bias is a necessary coping mechanism meant to help us move forward, heal, and eventually love again. It's a memory healing mechanism. But for Rick Sanchez, it's a fatal psychological disease that keeps him anchored to the past. By obsessively loving a memory for decades and not allowing it to fade, Rick has idealized the absolute hell out of his relationship with Diane. She's no longer a messy, flawed human being who made mistakes. In his mind, she's been stripped of her humanity and elevated to the status of an untouchable, flawless goddess. She's the ultimate impossible standard of perfection. She can't be changed. And the terrible thing about comparing the real, breathing world to a perfect memory is that the real world will always lose. Some people prefer fantasy people than real people. Reality is messy, people are annoying. Relationships require compromise, patience, and extreme emotional vulnerability. How can Rick ever find love again or appreciate his deeply dysfunctional family when he's constantly comparing them to a pristine, flawless ghost who never argues back? He can't connect with the living because the living are inherently flawed, and Diane is forever perfect. Rick has what we sometimes call death envy. But here's where Rick's genius actually turns against him. Rick knows how the human brain works. He's smart. He's terrified that time will heal his wounds and change him. To Rick, letting the wound heal feels like a betrayal. He feels that if he stops hurting, if he stops remembering, it means that he's stopped loving her. Why would the smartest man in the universe do this to himself? Because he programmed her ghost directly into the walls of his house so that he'd never, ever be allowed to forget the agony of her absence, to be reminded in a haunting way. He trapped himself in an endless loop where he loved the idea of Diane so much and wanted to punish himself with guilt that it completely poisoned his own ability to love anything real. But a ghost like that can only haunt you for so long before the weight of it crushes your mind entirely and makes you escape. You can't live your entire life in a graveyard, no matter how beautiful the headstone is. The crushing gravity of this perfection eventually brings Rick to his absolute breaking point, and he makes an impossible, devastating choice. How do you kill a ghost that lives exclusively in your own head?
Dear Rick, you took the memory of Diane out of your head. You did this to be more emotionally open. Don't at me.
After decades of multiversal slaughter, after finally avenging her death by beating Rick Prime to a bloody pulp, and after walking away from the fear hole, Rick Sanchez arrives at the ultimate terrifying crossroad. He's run completely out of villains outside of himself. There are no more alternate Ricks to shoot. There are no more galactic empires to topple. He's left sitting in a garage, completely alone with his own brain. As long as Diane's perfect, untouchable memory lives inside his cerebral cortex, Rick is going to stay chained to the ruins of his past. He's gonna keep drinking, keep lashing out, and keep pushing away the family sitting right upstairs. He has to move on. He has to improve himself. He has to begin to love his own family in the present. Faced to the reality that he can either keep loving a ghost or start loving his grandson for real, Rick makes the most drastic, psychologically disturbing decision a human being can make.
Thank you for keeping me alive this long, Rick.
Yeah. Goodbye, Memory Diane.
When you really stop to analyze the philosophical and emotional implications of this scene, it's a profoundly horrifying concept. For 20 years, Rick's entire identity was the man who lost Diane. Her memory was the only thing he actually respected. Erasing the love of your life from your own brain feels like you're killing her all over again. This forces us as the audience to ask, was this a good idea? Was this the ultimate act of cowardice from a man who refuses to process his feelings, or was it the ultimate act of survival? Honestly, it was the only way out. Rick had elevated Diane to the status of an impossible, flawless goddess in human form. By executing the memory wipe, that impossible standard is instantly and completely shattered, and he reverts back to a person who can finally love properly again. The altar he built in his own mind is violently torn down, and now he can start to change. For the first time in his adult life, Rick Sanchez is forced to look around the room and actually see the people standing in front of him as unique people deserving of their own type of love. Rick's obsession with Diane perfectly explains why his grief was so destructive over the years, but that's only half the story. Rick's obsession with Diane perfectly explains why his grief is so destructive, but that's only one half of the story. If you want to actually know the exact psychological reason his ego destroys his relationships with the living, click the video on screen right now to find out why Rick can't find love. Did Rick make the right call, erasing Diane, or was it an act of cowardice? Let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.